Hello, my name is Dr. Jim Doty, and I'm the host of the Into the Magic Shop podcast, where we explore the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. Chip, how are you today?
Wonderful, Jim. How are you? Good to meet you here on your podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for coming on. You've had an interesting career and have done some very interesting things. And one of the things I think that you're most known for is probably the creation of the American Renewable Energy Day. And I'd sort of like to go a little backward in time and ask you how you got involved in renewable energy and your concern, if you will, about the planet.
Right. Well, that's a deep question. And that goes back to probably my childhood when I had the good fortune of being raised without a formal religion. My father was Jewish, but not practicing, and my mother was Christian, both Catholic and Protestant. And so we weren't raised in a church setting. And so by the time I got to be about 12, 13, the what, where, when, who, how questions started to arise. And a book fell into my lap called Black Elk Speaks, and it spoke to me. This is the Lakota mystic, if you will, one of the great classic anthropological books written by a Lakota Indian who was born in the 1850s. His uncle was Crazy Horse, and he lived through the transition from the natural expression to the modern forced world of European Americans that colonized the continent. At any rate, that built in some sensibilities as a teenager that then translated out later on in life. When I began working with the Lakota tribe in 2003, I'm a filmmaker, and I was hired to record the first utility scale wind turbine to be owned by a Native American tribe. That was the Rosebud turbine up in Rosebud, South Dakota. And in the doing, I learned that renewable energy is very important to our biosphere. And I was also interested in economic and social justice for some of the poorest people in the world and live right here, the fourth world and the first world right here in the United States of America. And so that began a journey that ended up producing the first R-Day Summit. The first R-Day in 2004. It actually became actualized as a summit when Ted Turner showed up in 2008. He came back 5 times. He brought T. Boone Pickens with him, so we had both right and left. What we like to say at R-Day is that, while Ted Turner might be to the left of John Lennon and T. Boone Pickens to the right of Attila the Hun, they both came together in the middle and met on the green carpet of R-Day, red meets blue on the green, where we began to talk about our commonality and our sameness. And so the last time Ted was here in 2014, he brought President Carter with him. So that began our presidential expression, because the next year we had Kevin Rudd, who was the former Prime Minister of Australia, and then after that, the President of Iceland. 14, 15, 16. And so we've had a very good luck in terms of convening at the highest level of the heads of industry, billionaire philanthropists, but also people like James Cameron showed up when Avatar was in the movie theaters. We've had a good expression from Hollywood. And so it's cross-sector dialogue that we've been convening on this most serious of all existential issues, in my view, which is the packing of the atmosphere with the approximately 3 trillion tons of anthropogenically created and forced CO2 and other greenhouse gases that are in fact now creating these cascading tipping points and feedback loops that are seriously impacting the natural environment, the forest fires, the floods, the droughts, et cetera, acidifying the ocean, crashing the coral reefs, et cetera. And so, in a nutshell, that's kind of where I'm coming from pretty much for this entire century, beginning.
Well, As you well know, I mean, we have created an existential crisis, which is not only affecting you and I, but that being said, um, the millennials and the Gen Zers, and many of them feel they have no future. It's fascinating, though. Everyone seems to be aware of this. There seems to be an opinion by a subset of people that this is manufactured, that the earth goes through these different changes, and there's nothing that needs to be done. And then, of course, many who say that we've already crossed several planetary boundaries and we need to do something immediately. Two questions. One is, and maybe it's a question that's hard to even answer or explain, but that question is, why is it that we have this vast disparity between these different visions, if you will? And two is, how do we get out of it? And obviously, I know that's not a simple question. I'm not trying to put you on a spot, but I just want to understand your views on those two aspects.
Well, let's start with the last one, which is how we get out of it. That's why we started the American Renewable Energy Institute, because I'm a believer in science, and I believe that science and physics don't really care whether you believe in them or not. They just exist. And so the fact of the matter is that burning this massive amount of coal, oil, and gas has produced the effects that we're now seeing. I would remind you and your listeners that the two hockey stick graphs that track each other going up would be the amount of oil, coal, and gas that we've taken out of the Mother Earth and refined and burnt into the atmosphere for short-term gain, meaning power, both money and energy, and then dump the waste product into the troposphere, the atmosphere, which is actually burning down the biosphere. Has also been driving the exponential population of the planet. Because when we started burning and extracting in earnest around 1915, we were approximately 2 billion people on planet Earth. Well, that's just a little over 100 years ago. Now we're 8. They tell us that 12 years ago we were 7. That's how quickly, that's what exponential expansion looks like in the human population, but it also is having a similar effect in the atmosphere. I would also remind us all that what is in fact oil, coal, and gas is all of the old life. It's the dinosaurs, it's the phytoplankton in the ocean, it's the trees, it's all the organic matter, and it's our grandparents. It's what we become after we die eventually. And so to take the old life out of Mother Earth that's nicely sequestered and then, burn it and quickly replace the leftover pollution that then is stealing the future of life to come. I mean, I think that's the real existential question that we're facing here. So, in terms of what fixes it, I think it's not only a shift in energy. Like in other words, we've got to go from energy that hurts us to energy that helps us, or as Bobby Kennedy once said before he was running for president.
This is Bobby Kennedy Sr., of course.
Right, but I think he got this from his dad, and it's kind of like, let's get our energy from heaven above and not hell below. That's a nice Christian way of explaining the situation, I suppose. But it's really, it reflects the fact that we could have all the energy that we need from the sun and the wind and from the geothermal resources within the earth, as well as energy efficiency is at the top of the list, because we're such a wasteful society of humans in terms of how we technically do this. And I apologize, I forgot the first question at this point. So
it's okay. Listen, I do the same thing. That question was actually, why is there such disparity between opinions, if you want to say the left and the right? Now, I think that some of them are self-evident, perhaps, but it always fascinates me how you have the same amount of data. And I think you would agree that there's absolutely no question, based on, as you said, science, of what we're doing here. Why is there so much resistance to science by some people, which even to the point where it threatens their lives?
Well, at this point, James, I would have to quote Upton Sinclair, and I'm going to really, butcher this quote, but it's along the lines of, if a man's salary is tied to him not understanding something, then it's really difficult to get him to understand that thing. And so, another way of saying that is that in a world that's based on capitalism, that's predicated on unlimited, unending resources, meaning that there's always going to be, fish in the sea and timber in the woods and oil in the ground to be exploited, and that there's always going to be more consumers to consume. Well, it's a false premise, in my view. My colleagues, Amory Lovins and Paul Hawken and Hunter Lovins, wrote a book at the end of the last century. In 1999, it came out, called Natural Capitalism, which really delved into this issue quite deeply, and that it's basically, capitalism is based on a false premise that we're living in an infinite world of resources and an expanding economy, ever expanding economy, with the quarterly reports and so forth. And you know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of, Wall Street and how the SEC is built and so forth. And so, so there, that's what I would say in terms of, what brought us to this point. So my question to you is, what brings us out of this point into, a sustainable world?
Well, that was what I asked you, but now you're reflecting it back on me. I think we're in a bind here, and either there has to be some coming together of these polar opposite opinions and some compromises. I think you're absolutely correct. Unfortunately, the nature of capitalism is predicated on this false premise of ever increasing or expanding economy, which just makes no logical sense. I think the other problem is that, as you mentioned earlier, we're very wasteful. We create products that cannot be fixed, so they have to be thrown away. We keep promoting a premise that everyone should embrace ever expanding technology, and that there should be a ever increasing lifestyle, all of these to the detriment of the planet. As an example, as you well know, I mean, the United States, consumes about 25% of the world's resources, with only 350 million out of the 8 billion people. I mean, this is frankly an outrage. Yet, the problem, of course, is when people have privilege, if you suggest limiting that privilege or getting rid of the privilege, they feel like they're being oppressed, which creates another narrative. Now, it's also interesting that while we consume all of these things in the United States, we have a population of which the vast majority of people have less than $400 in disposable income. And we have this ever increasing income inequality, which benefits a very, very small group of people, and to the detriment of a very large percentage of people. I think the other aspect is that we have this World Economic Forum, yet who gets to attend? The people in power, the people who control the money, and the wealthiest people in the world, and they have a perception that they have a right to determine how the rest of the world responds. And again, it gets back to the same premise. This subset of people, if you ever mention getting rid of their privilege or limiting their privileges, then of course they feel oppressed, and that shouldn't happen. There's an interesting quote by Tolstoy, and I'll similarly destroy my quote, but it says, there's a monkey on your back choking, or I should say, there's a man on your back choking you. He acknowledges he's on your back choking you, but at no time does he ever offer to get off your back and stop choking you. And I think that's what we're seeing today. But we ultimately have to face this, and I think this is part of the problem, is that something's got to give, and not only in regard to the climate, but frankly in regard to humanity, because when the extractive process, which is the nature of capitalism, gets so excessive, you will have an event similar to the French Revolution. And I would think if these individuals look at this logically, that they would understand it's in their best interest to do what's right and not to continually want.
Well, I concur. Obviously, look, I would point out that there's 4,000 billionaires on the planet, and there's 8 billion other people, and that the world operates on an $80 trillion annual GDP, 193 countries all in. The U.S. is the biggest economy in the world, and China's number 2. But those 2 countries together literally control half of the world's GDP. Everybody else is subservient to that. And that $80 trillion GDP is based on the extraction and burning of fossil fuel to run the engine. So it's no wonder that we're right where we are, in fact. And I would posit that war, the military-industrial complex, is big oil and big weapons together in this way. So it really is it's a bit of a conundrum, and in fact, I think that we not only need to change our energy systems, and we talk about this at the R Day. We do have this element in it. It's a cross-sector dialogue, remember, that we need to also change shift our consciousness and how we see ourselves as human beings on this water planet that's, tilted on its axis and spinning and, chasing around the sun, which is in fact chasing, the sun goes around its center point one time every 250 million years. Now put that into your pipe and smoke it. Okay. That means that the sun has made, I think, approximately 13 turns since its creation. They tell us, they think the sun was created, I can't remember. The Earth is 4.5 billion, whatever. Anyway, the numbers get pretty big. But the point I guess I'm trying to make is that, I don't think that human beings are cognizant of the true nature of our existence. And that's one of the reasons why we focus so heavily on the indigenous element, wisdom, at the R Day, because, I feel very strongly that the indigenous people, and there's about 800 million of them around the planet Earth, and it's their reserves, it's their reservations, it's their traditional territories that are the de facto firewall between humanity and the remaining biosphere. When E.O. Wilson says half Earth is needed to maintain, a healthy, to just maintain life, that's what he's talking about. And so I think that the indigenous people of the planet, they remember the original instructions much more clearly than the rest. And I think that that's one of the reasons why you're seeing a lot of emphasis being placed there now, not only in our conference, but in many different, places around the planet. We need to get back to the balance, and that's not only the balance between, energy and resources, but also the balance between, people, males and females and so forth.
No, I think you're right. I recently had an indigenous Mayan woman on the podcast named Uriah Celedwin, and we had a long conversation about the reality that man thrives when he's connected to nature, and that's how he evolved as a species. And the further we get away from that, the further it harms us. and we forget our place in the natural world. And as a result, we suffer. And secondary to that, then nature suffers itself. What's disconcerting is, though, how far do we have to get before there's a global collapse of the ocean and a variety of different species? I'm sure you're aware of the fact that there are a number of an ever-growing number of species that are going to soon be extinct. And once there's collapse of the oceans, we're going to be in very big trouble.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. The balance is being threatened on all levels, and it's we're hitting that critical tipping point. But I want to send a message of hope and inspiration here, because I think that one of the well, first of all, when you mentioned earlier in the podcast that the youth are becoming very apathetic, there's increasing rates of teen suicide, not only in tribal nations, which by the way is the highest in the world, but it's also inherent within the population, that I believe the packing of the atmosphere with this carbon is creating a new form of mental illness. And, we're known as Homo sapiens, right? Like the wise ape that knows that it knows, or something like that, I guess, loosely interpreted. But that the actual physical effect of these greenhouse gases, beyond the airborne particulates, beyond when the forest fires turned New York City black for a day or two last summer, and you can't even see the Brooklyn Bridge, right? Beyond that, it's the fact that we have raised the carbon concentration from 280, 300, where it's been for a million years, up to now 420 to, I don't know, 480, depending on where you're measuring. Let's remember that we're dumping 60 billion tons per year on top of the 3 trillion plus that's already up there. So that's, you can only pack the atmosphere so much, and then the feedback loops become, it's our atmosphere, our biosphere, it's only a very narrow band, that you can see when you take those pictures of the Earth from outer space, and you see that blue, aura surrounding the planet. That's where all life exists. That's where all life that's ever been on this planet from the beginning of time, in terms of how we measure that, that's where it all has occurred, in that little thin, 3-4 mile strip. And that's called the atmosphere and the troposphere. You get up to the stratosphere, you can't live up there. Life doesn't exist there. So, and then outer space and so forth. So anyway, I think that to acknowledge that life itself on the water planet, which is very rare, we know that water probably exists in the vastness of the universe, but it's very rare. We don't see it around here very much, at least not in our solar system. And so, we've got to take care of this wondrous place, and we're not doing a very good job of that. But back to, the practicality of the transition that's being suggested by the Biden administration through the IRA bill, through the money that's on the table for these hydrogen hubs that were just announced around the country, for the other things that they're suggesting, direct air capture, carbon capture and sequestration. We're finding out that that's pretty much pie in the sky stuff. It doesn't really work. It's a nice idea, kind of like what Gandhi said about Western civilization, but maybe not so much in practical reality. And so I think that there's a big movement back to the land that really has to do with regeneration of agricultural practices, regeneration of the soil, the restoration of the soil through the organic growings of food, also um, building healthy communities within microgrid systems, becoming self-reliant within community. And this goes back to the tribal understandings of how communities can, be reliant on one another, because the human race has separated itself by, I think 80% of humanity lives in these cities, right, the mega cities, and that we have basically separated ourselves from each other in these little cubicles called apartments, and our interactions are kind of determined by our tribe, right, and so now it looks like there's in order for us to really move into the next phase of human evolution, we're going to have to remember what community is all about, and that includes in the urban environment as well.
Well, in some ways, it's like de-evolving in the sense that we have to go back to those methods that have traditionally worked over thousands of years to recognize the value of nature and live within harmony with nature. And otherwise, as you said, we're talking about mental illness. You're absolutely correct. There's ever growing mental illness, especially among the youth. And a great part of this is due to this separation and this acknowledgement that, while on the one hand, you could argue that living in cities, et cetera, supports humanity and provides for ever increasing growth. But that being said, at what cost? You mentioned consciousness. If you look at Native American or other indigenous traditions, they were absolutely corrected or connected to nature and got not only solace, but wisdom, growth, connection, which sustained them and the planet. And we're so separated from this. I think one of the great things is, though, that we're starting to recognize that and hopefully embrace that. And there are a lot of indigenous peoples that are coming together to not only promote their own traditions, but recognize the interconnectedness of all of these traditions. You mentioned the reality that suicide and drug and alcohol abuse are endemic within a lot of these tribal cultures. And of course, part of the problem is the colonization and complete lack of regard for these traditions, with a desire actually to eliminate them, to put in their place European views of how one should live. And of course, if your dignity is destroyed by destroying your culture, your language, then you have nothing to live for a lot of these people, especially in regard to the fact that these colonists typically take the best land and then continue to push these tribes into the worst land. And as soon as an example, let's say oil is found, then they push them off of that, and it's take. And you can certainly understand why these indigenous cultures are suffering so much. But again, I am optimistic that there is a recognition of this reality, and hopefully a turning away from this separation from nature.
Well, it is. It's really the bottom line, isn't it? It's the separation from nature, and one of the things we just did our day, and the third day we honored Indigenous Day, which was the formerly known as Colonialist Day, I guess, or whatever that guy's name was. But anyway, the point I'm making, or trying to make or get to here, is that we also put a spotlight on women and women's leadership, and that really goes to the great imbalance between male and female energies, which kind of really tracks back, in my view. I mean, this goes back 6,000 years. I mean, in our history, where the Old Testament states that it's a male God, a wrathful God, heaven and hell, up or down. And, woman got us kicked out of the Garden of Eden and talked to that snake and, ate that apple and all that business and comes out of the male's rib. I mean, come on. So, we're talking about something here where that, yeah, I mean, the males of the species are physically stronger. In the caveman days, we went out and, got the brontosaurus and dragged it back home, just like we learned in Fred Flintstone when we were kids. But the reality is that, men and women are, man brings half and woman brings half, and together we make the whole. Okay. And there's equality of value here. And I think that really, when we talk about the planet, which is, the Mother Earth, Mother Nature, the ocean is referred to as she. We name all of our ships she, female, right? Feminine, receptive. The sun, gives us the rays that creates photosynthesis. And so, we have to find the balance. We have to really search and find the balance. And really, I connect that directly to renewable energy myself. I think it's inherent within the sun and the wind that we can find our, equilibrium again, and that we need to choose that.
Let me just comment on actually the raising of cattle as an example in terms of destruction of the environment. How significant is that?
Yeah, I mean, 1/5 of all greenhouse gases we know come from how we do animal and agriculture, but particularly these feedlots and
industrial farming.
Industrial farming. It's quite a big chunk of the greenhouse gas throughput. And as my colleague Luis Cehoyos, the Oscar-winning director of The Cove, who was with us last weekend, and also created the movie called Racing Extinction, of which I was one of the producers. He really focuses a lot on really changing our diets. The best way you can impact and change the situation is to change your diet. You'll become healthier, and you're going to help the planet, by becoming a vegan, or at least becoming choosing vegetarian over meat. So that's there's a strong case to be made there.
Well, certainly dramatically cutting down on meat consumption, if not completely. But I think that's exactly right. And I just wanted to point that out because some people think it's all related to fossil fuels, but it's also related to different types of agriculture and the industrialization of many of these practices, as an example, as we were talking about cattle. I think people forget that. And again, it's a further separation from nature where you're growing massive amounts of livestock in very small amounts of land. And it has, again, a huge negative impact. What, in terms of renewable energy, do you see any dramatic breaks in the sense of, we talked about exponentially increasing the amount of energy that can be created by renewable resources? As I understand it, there's been some interesting advances in solar panels. Any other areas that we can see a promising future?
Yeah, I mean, we like to, so in the 2000s, when the Bush administration came in and Dick Cheney greenlit the massive development of natural gas, we punched in something like 300,000 new wells between the Penzance Basin in Colorado, where I live, the Marcellus Shale up in Pennsylvania, other places, through fracking. This was the big evolution. And it turns out that because of fugitive emissions at wellhead and the fact that each one of these wells requires somewhere on the magnitude of 5 million gallons of water to do this fracking, so it's very water intensive. And in the desert Southwest where I live, that's a radical use of water. that's produced water. It's no longer usable. You can't just take it and put it on the crops, you know. Um, anyway, we were told that natural gas was the bridge between fossil fuels and renewable energy. And we were told that by some pretty respectable folks that had really been thinking about it a long time. But we found out that that was a bridge to nowhere, essentially, okay, and that there might be actually a net increase of greenhouse gases from this methane that we were getting out of the ground. I mean, we know that that's true, and that's one of the reasons why the feedback loops are accelerating, because methane is 20 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. But now I like to think that and state that renewable energy is the bridge between fossil fuels and hydrogen, and that hydrogen is going to become the carrier of the clean energies. Now, hydrogen is also a fossil fuel. Let's not forget about that, except for when it's not. And it's not a fossil fuel when it's derived through the green hydrogen technologies, which means electrolysis, where you split H2O, water, you split off the hydrogen, and all you have left is water. Right now, the hydrogen industry is driven by the fossil fuel companies in the reformation of methane and stripping it from the methane, and then if it's black hydrogen or brown, then you're just dumping the greenhouse gases. If it's blue, then you're capturing it, but then you have to prove up. Are you actually doing that? Are you actually sequestering that? And there's a whole myriad of other colors that we could get into in terms of the hydrogen. But it's a lot of hope for that.
Why do you think hydrogen, though, has not taken off? I mean, we look at electric cars as an example, which people like to promote that it's much better than use of fossil fuels. But if you look as an example, how much increase in tire residual that goes into the plant in terms of microplastics, or if you look at the cost of mining for these different minerals necessary to create batteries, and the necessity to dispose of them. How does that compare to, let's say, use of nitrogen fuel for automobiles? And why hasn't that been looked into a bit more?
You mean hydrogen for autos? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, because there's so much, it's so energy intensive it takes a massive amount of electricity to use these giant electrolyzers to split water, or the hope is seawater. Well,
Right.
there's a lot more ocean water than there is fresh water. And if we could create our hydrogen from offshore, these gigantic, offshore wind units with these electrolyzers, I mean, it's looking very hopeful. We have the technology. It's a matter of, can we deploy it at scale? But again, it has to do with energy. Okay, so that goes to the markets of capitalistic, planet, right? And so what's the cost of energy? Now, solar and wind have brought the cost of energy way down. From when I started in 2004, as an example, there was 2,500 megawatts of installed utility wind energy in the United States. Today, there's well over 200,000, and it constitutes the fastest growth sector of the utility scale electricity business. I mean, of any energy, including nuclear or hydro or anything. I mean, wind owns that. Now solar has come along around 2015. China brought the cost way down. But remember, as people remind me all the time, there's lots and lots of rare earth elements and toxic materials that go into the manufacturing of the wind turbines, the blades, the nacelles, the solar panels, the silicon, the rare earth elements that have to be procured, usually with child slave labor in the Congo to get the cobalt to put in the batteries for the Teslas. I mean, it's really quite extensive, and we have to look at every single thing, every step of the way, with the hope being that eventually we do have a closed system where the energy, the waste of one product becomes the energy input of the other, and we go around the circle with no emissions whatsoever. And we think that we can do that, but in the meantime, we're in the middle of this great energy transition, and I think transformation, quite honestly. but there's a lot of resistance. Let's face it. I mean, you know, the Seven Sisters, right? The big seven oil companies. They don't really like having their profit centers reduced. And by the way, when COVID kicked in, and the human race was forced into the corner with its like dunce hat on, the way I look at it, and nobody could drive around because we were all afraid of dying if we stuck our nose out the door and saw our neighbor. But what happened as a result of that? It was amazing, wasn't it? I mean, look at like in LA, you could roll a bowling ball down the 405 and, there wasn't a car in sight. And all of a sudden, the skies cleared and you could see the mountains and the fish started jumping out of the water and the dolphins came up the river. All over the world this happened, and all we did was stop the burning for like a brief 3 months. Imagine if we did that for 3 years or even 1 year. I mean, it was amazing. The recovery, the regenerative capacity of the planet immediately just kicked in. Just the Earth just went, took a big breath, because we had stopped the burning just for that brief period of time. And I really think it's important for us to remember that, that we have the capacity to make the changes, and that the Earth is going to support us. Nature will support us if we stop hammering every single place, stop cutting down incessantly the Amazon rainforest, stop cutting down the temporal forests around the planet, stop taking every last fish out of the sea with these industrial operations, that pull 7 tons, a day or whatever out of the ocean. I mean, it's insane, and thinking that's going to in some way be sustainable. And again, that goes to the earlier conversation here where we were talking about capitalism and the unending growth that's based on. So this conversation is being had at the United Nations, at the COP.
Sure. Well, the problem is, I mean, as we've seen with the variety of COP discussions about the environment, it's wonderful to talk about, but nobody does anything.
Well, there you go.
And again, you could argue about the reality of the UN. Again, it's great to put proposals forth, but unless something happens, it doesn't have a whole lot of meaning. And again, therein lies the problem. It's interesting. You were talking about the oil companies, and we did have an opportunity in the West or in the United States to create a mass transit, or even and whether that's be buses or trains or whatever it was. And you look at Europe, where every city is massively connected and most people don't drive cars, or in Amsterdam, of course, or in Netherlands, they drive bicycles. And, it has a profound effect. And it's sad that we have been brainwashed into thinking that it's okay to drive our cars 3 miles to the grocery store and then drive it back and not do any exercise or any of these other things. And so, again, I hate to say, capitalism has become ruthless capitalism with little regard for human beings.
I mean, I totally agree with you. And that's where we fundamentally must have a shift in our consciousness. It's interesting. So Xi Jinping's been getting a lot of bad press the last couple of years, right? The president of China. But I'll tell you what, he wrote a book, or he commissioned a book or something, a paper that was, about 60 pages. I read it. It was called The Ecological Civilization. Came out around 2013. But the ideas that were being, proposed and expounded on were quite extraordinary, in terms of what is an ecological civilization. What does it mean to have 8 billion people living in a way that is actually supporting the natural systems that support us? I mean, don't forget that 3/4 of the oxygen, 3 out of 4 breaths that you breathe come from the phytoplankton in the ocean. That's where it's from. The rest of it comes from the trees and the plants in terms of the respiration of the planet. And so the ocean is critical to this conversation. 71% of the Earth's surface is the ocean. We showed a movie last Saturday that was called Deep Rising, and this is about the proposed deep seabed mining industry to go out down there and get the nodules that have these rare earth elements. But the destruction that would create, the havoc that would stir up. I mean, this is the remaining 71% of the planet's surface that's pretty much untouched, the bottom of the ocean. We've taken the fish out of the mid layers, but down at the bottom, we haven't really done anything there yet. And so, it might be wise to just, leave well enough alone at this point, given what we see happening, everywhere else. But as my friend Paul Watson, who created the Sea Shepherd, and he says, if the ocean dies, we die, and he's right about
that. Let's go back to another aspect of this, which, how do we deal with the developing countries? As you know, they don't have the resources or the wealth of the first world, if you will. They're burning a lot of trees, and they're just trying to survive in a very difficult situation. What contribution does that have in regard to ecological destruction, and what are the obligations of the first world? And maybe it's a selfish one, is to allow for our survival, but again, we're not even dealing with our own issues. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the industrialized nations, the richest nations in the world, they feel like they have the right to, use the atmosphere as an open sewer and to make as much money as possible at the expense of everybody else. And this is just the old, empire colonialist, thinking that has from the ancient world that has still, has its remaining vestiges expressing itself here in the 21st century, in my opinion. And so how do we treat the global South that's receiving, the frontline impacts the most severely of runaway catastrophic climate change, when they've done the least to create it, like these island nations in the Pacific that are literally sinking, I remember I had a dinner with President Anote from Kiribati, and when I was out in Hawaii for the IUCN meeting in 2015, and he began weeping at the table because he said, do you know what it means to actually lose your country underwater? You have to go and look for a new country somewhere, It's not like he can say, hey, Australia, can we have a country over there now? And that's what they're having to do. And there's other countries like that, or our island nations at least. But, sea level rise is happening. We know this. And, and there's also a great mass migration when you talk about this as well, in the form of these climate refugees that are happening. There's a reason why there's so many people coming north out of Central and South America trying to get to America, and one of those reasons that is it's becoming very difficult to live in a subsistence manner because of the weather patterns that have been disrupted and the cycles that are out of balance. So we are definitely well, I guess we're reaping what we've sown, and the ones that are the wealthiest countries are the ones that are the most responsible, but we're not very good at taking responsibility for that. I mean, the IMF should be putting $1 trillion a year into this particular aspect of the solution, but it's not. And so.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is the challenge. Where it is sort of an interesting irony where the first world, 2, 3, 4, 500 years ago, destroyed their own environments, cut down trees, coal mining, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're dictating to those who, from a evolutionary point of view, are catching up to us, but we don't want to allow them to do effectively what we did, nor are we providing then the economic support necessarily so they don't have to do that. And again, it's another challenge involving this whole situation. And I believe that unless we come together as one, and that it is going to continue, like you said, yourself and many other people, especially indigenous tribes, are really sending out this message, and it's absolutely one we all have to listen to. Maybe you can, from your perspective, summarize, if you will, some of the key points that are necessary to turn this around, if you wouldn't mind.
I mean, in a world of haves and have-nots, the haves have got to step up to the plate now. So there's only 4,000 billionaires on the planet Earth, and they have, well, probably well over half of the money, I would think. And I think that maybe I'm going to do a conference in the future, and we'll call it "Calling All Billionaires." I mean, look, the house is on fire, and people are standing there looking at it, going, "Wow, look at that." But they're not taking action. They're not doing what's necessary to put out the fire. And you can run, but you cannot hide. Like some people think that, oh well, I'll just buy an estate down in New Zealand, and then I'll watch the whole thing go down. It's not going to work like that. you know.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Somebody had an individual who's a futurist was called by a group of billionaires, and they said, we're planning for the big disaster where the world's going to collapse, and we're buying land like in New Zealand, et cetera. And we have mercenaries who we're hiring. And one of the questions was, well, what's going to stop the mercenaries from coming after you? And
Yeah.
And why wouldn't they?
Right.
If everything is collapsing, I would think you'll end up with various powerful individuals who will try to take control of those situations. But you're right, there is no place to hide, and they're going to pay the price just like everyone else. It's interesting because it's like dying. Somehow there's this narrative that they can enjoy themselves, be extraordinarily selfish, not engage with the reality that so many people are suffering, yet they're going to die, just like all of us are going to die. And what would be a better way than to ensure the life of our planet than to die with your bank full of cash?
Sure. I mean, James, they don't make hearses with luggage racks, and, there's a reason for that. And, so you can't take it with you, but also I think that, we're getting down to the fundamental core premise of why we're faced with these issues today. And it's because, we're mortal beings and we're afraid of what we don't understand, and we don't understand our death. And because death is part of nature, then we try to control what we don't understand. So humanity is in this control issue with nature instead of realizing that, death is just another part of life, and that, in the great cycle of the creation, and that there's actually nothing to be afraid of. I mean, all the major and minor religions try to address this in some way or another. But the fact of the matter is that we continue to, pray at the altar of more is never enough. And so hoarding becomes the cultural, meme throughout the continuum of humanity, whether it's communism or capitalism or whatever other isms there are out there. And there's plenty of them, we have to confront our own humanity. And I think that, it really does come down to a change in consciousness. We're literally going to have to, shift how we see it in order for us to be able to survive what we've wrought on this planet.
Exactly. And I guess on that note, I think all of us, even though many of us feel we don't have any agency, if those of us who see the future come together, I think we can have a dramatic change in our consciousness and force those, if you will, to do the right thing. And people like you, and I think so many other people in the world, if we can hold hands together and promote that narrative, then I think we will see change. Chip, thanks for being with me today. It was an enjoyable conversation, and I look forward to hopefully attending one of your conferences.
Yes, and on that note, let me be a shameless self-plugger and say that we just went through part 1 of Climate, Democracy, and Human Security, part 1, and that's Our Day Impact at E-Town. So we've partnered with E-Town in Boulder, Colorado, a wonderful nationally syndicated radio program, and they would like for us to come back and do part 2. So we're going to do that June 1 through 3 in Boulder, Colorado. And they've also suggested that we begin to curate once a month an impact film, because we do have our impact film division of the AREI and the Our Day Summit. So we're going to be doing that once a month, bringing a film that addresses the issues that we discussed today. So, come on out to Boulder. We've kind of, moved down out of Aspen. We've been up there. We did 16 consecutive summits in Aspen from 2004 to 2019 before we got knocked out by the COVID. And we just came out of our forced hiatus, and we had a really good meeting. Everybody was very pleased. Me the most, because I wasn't sure how it was going to go. But anyway, thanks for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you, and look forward to what the future might bring.
Well, it's really been my pleasure, and I hope all of our listeners participate in that event. And thanks again. Have a great day.
Great. Thanks.
Take care. Again, thank you for being with us today. The Into the Magic Shop podcast can be found where you find your most popular podcasts, or you can find us at intothemagicshop.com.